Welcome History 141 class. John Fia here, and Megan Piet, our producer, is behind the camera as usual. We are moving our way through the third segment of United States history, and we talked last time about the rise of the market economy, the building of roads, bridges, the creating of a nation through sort of economic means. Today we're going to talk about some significant political and cultural changes that are happening in the early republic, or at least that's what we lectured on earlier this week, and that is democracy, the rise of democracy in America. Now, you remember I asked you in lecture, what did the founding fathers think about democracy, or we've been calling it like the D word, right? The great political sort of swear word for many of the founders. And we talked about this, if you remember, back in the 1780s, how democracy was sort of teeming in these state and local governments. And the Constitution came along and in many ways sort of tempered that democratic spirit. Because the founders did not believe, most of them did not believe, even if they defended the rights of the common person, they parted ways with, say, someone like Thomas Paine, who believed that, all people should be able to participate in government based on common sense. Many of the founders, both Federalists and Jeffersonians, were very, very wary of allowing uneducated common farmers and other workers to participate in government. So democracy really does not become a sort of defining defining part of our culture until the early 19th century. And when we think about democracy, we kind of got to wipe these guys off the slate here, because a lot of them later in life, especially, they're saying, I can't believe how democratic this country is. I can't believe the way this country has moved. Jefferson and Adams write letters back and forth in the 1820s, about, what's happening here, because they see democracy as a very sort of self-interested form of government. It's something in which, one person, one vote, one man, one vote. You can vote based on your own particular needs. And in that way, it's sort of antithetical to the kind of Republican virtue that many of the founders had hoped, a sort of commitment to the public good over your own self-interest. Nevertheless, the country is moving in the early 19th century in a democratic way. Tom Paine was ultimately right in Common Sense in 1776. He was well ahead of his time, but the vision of a democratic republic really begins to take off during this period. And as I said in lecture, this happens in not just the political sphere, but in many other spheres of American life too. For example, in economics, you begin to see the markets, which we talked about last time, and the rise of consumerism, and the way in which consumerism then empowers ordinary people to make economic choices in their lives, to choose one product over another product. Again, you could look at democracy very much as a sort of individualistic kind of form of political culture, if you will. Something that empowers the individual to make choices in their lives that they didn't have before. So consumerism and the rise of the market economy empowers individuals, shoppers like you and me, to go out there and exercise choices in their economic lives. We also talked a little bit about the religious changes going on in the country and the transition from a more Calvinist understanding of salvation to a second great awakening, which is much more driven by free will evangelicalism, free will salvation. In other words, you have a role to play in your salvation. God does not just save you and you are entirely passive in the process, but you have a choice. You can accept or reject the gospel. And we talked a little bit about Charles Finney being a leader of this free will awakening, and how this religion or this form of Christianity becomes very, very democratic in nature. It empowers individuals. In the store, you can choose, what brand of shoes you want to buy, or to use a modern example, you can choose Coke or Pepsi, right? In religion now, you can make choices. You can decide whether or not you're going to accept or reject Jesus. Or even with the breakup of an established church, the First Amendment we talked about sort of disestablishes religion. That means all these Protestant denominations are going to have to compete with each other for converts. And that, again, empowers people like you and me, the individual, to make choices about our religion, right? We don't like the pastor here, we don't like the building here, and so forth. Again, we joked about how Messiah College students go church shopping when they show up on campus in the fall. That is a product of this more democratic, consumer-driven culture. And then, of course, democracy plays itself out in politics. We talked about how the popular vote in presidential elections, for example, is not even counted until 1824. We talked about the ways in which all of the states in the Union, by the time of Andrew Jackson's presidency, had embraced universal manhood suffrage. In other words, the idea that all men, regardless of how much property they owned, could vote. Now again, we in the 21st century say, well, that doesn't look like democracy to me. Women couldn't vote, slaves couldn't vote. But again, think historically here. The fact that America had universal manhood suffrage made it the most democratic country in the world in the 1820s and 1830s. We see the rise, for example, now of modern politics, political parties, campaigning, politicians trying to appeal to you, the ordinary person, to get their vote. That you will be hoping you'll give them their vote. Because again, with the power invested in people to make choices in their economic lives, their religious lives, people now have more power to make choices in their political lives as well. This is democracy, and this is the political philosophy that is going to come to dominate and be associated with the presidency of Andrew Jackson, or the so-called Age of Jackson, that we're going to be spending some time talking about a little bit next week. So I will see you next time, and hope you enjoyed this episode of the Virtual Office Hours. Have a good day.